Well, thank you for the invitation to be here today, and also thank you to the organisation for focusing on coasts. I think this is clearly, as Doug identified, an issue that is very worthy of attention and being seen in a broader context. So Doug asked me to talk about coasts as natural systems. I don't know how many of you know too much about coasts in general. I'm going to try and do just a little bit of education, but really try to put the natural aspects of coasts in some kind of broader context, and perhaps in more of a geographical context too. I think one important thing to note right up front is that when we talk about coasts and we put very big titles on the meetings like this, then we have to remember that there is a great diversity in terms of the different types of coastal environments, that even just within the continental US that we have. So it's not just sandy beaches, it's reefs and rocks and sands and cobbles and mangroves and marshes. All kinds of different things come together. The other thing I think that's important is to really remember why, and Larry gave us some statistics just now about why so many people do now and have done for centuries, if not millennia in other parts of the world, focused on coastal environments. They're actually really important areas for civilization. If you think about the cradles of civilization around the world, they're very often places where large rivers meet the sea, large areas of flat land, so you have access to marine navigation to spread the word and engage in trade. You also have adequate supplies of fresh water and flat land. Of course, now that also brings the risk of flooding with it, which is why we're here. But there are very good reasons why we spend a lot of time at the coast. And this is a point that I really want us to keep in mind as we go through. Many of the reasons that we spend time at the coast are not really optional in today's environment. There is this idea that people live there and they should pay and they should move and they should burden the risk. But many of the reasons that people live at the coast is in order that they can work in ports and harbours and support industries that are very important to us as a nation. This is not just about recreational properties, it's about, even just within the US context, it's about important economic development, and it's also about some important cultural, historical, and nationally important features and artifacts. Of course, with that development of the coast has come enormous change in the natural environment, and this is just an example from San Francisco Bay. I'm going to dodge around the country a little bit. I am going to focus on Louisiana for a short part of the talk here in a bit. But just to illustrate, don't worry about the details of this. I think you all understand the geography, the city of San Francisco, Golden Gate just here. And what you see in the changing color schemes from the Bay Eco Atlas from a map of around the turn of the 19th, 20th century towards something which is very much late 20th century is a real change in the types of natural environments. We have dramatically changed the coast of San Francisco Bay. That shoreline has been dramatically altered. Many important ecological natural environments have been almost essentially eliminated from that system. But of course, there are very important things that go on in and around the shores of San Francisco Bay that we may not be willing to just give up just because sea level is rising, that we really have to find a way of coping with. So I think one of the things that I really want to emphasize here is this interplay between the natural characteristics of coastal environments, be they marshes, beaches, mudflats, swamps, whatever they might be, and the uses that we make of those systems that are very important to us. And in terms of the kind of parlance of the day, if you like, we would suggest that coastal systems provide natural or ecosystem goods and services that people use, like recreation is an obvious one, pictures here. But comes with that the idea that those coastal uses also provide stresses and impacts to those natural systems. And so this is the balancing act that we are trying to manage here. And this is the interplay between the two that we mustn't forget. And then, of course, we have overlaid over the top of this the idea that the systems are changing. That many of them are very dynamic, natural geomorphic systems, and then overlaid on that is the accelerated rate of change that we expect because of climate change going forward. So how do we deal with this interplay? How do we put these two things together? And I'm going to suggest that it's really about strategy and about thinking. It's about thinking before you do. and focusing on what we really want these coastal systems to provide for us into the future. Not thinking about what they used to be like, thinking about what they can be in the future. And to leverage, to the extent that we can, I'm looking at this perhaps from the natural system perspective, and I'll give you an example in a moment, leverage those multiple things that we want to do at the coast in order to try and provide good outcomes, not just for the natural system, but for more of them. And I'm going to use this diagram here just to lean on a little bit here, and I spent a couple of minutes or a minute or so describing here. This is a concept of a typology, if you like, of coastal environments that Mike Weinstein and I dreamed up a few years ago. And on the vertical axis here, you have human domination, if you like, from low to high. What is the influence of people on the coastal system? And then on the horizontal axis, you have some characteristic of naturalness or ecosystem function. If you like, you'll have to read the paper to get the actual definitions. And this one actually goes from low over here to high over here. And so what that means is that we can identify 3 different types of coastal systems, what we call, and this was in the context of estuaries, but I think it can apply more broadly. The idea of the conservation estuary, where you have high naturalness, if you like, and relatively low human domination, going up to a scale of high human domination and low naturalness in these urban industrialized estuaries. And it's important to recognize that some coasts have very, very important urban and industrial functions to society. And then kind of in the middle there, we have what we're calling a production estuary. So let me see if I can just explain those terms a little bit with some examples. Starting at the conservation end of the spectrum. And if you think of these in terms of the actions that we might need to take in terms of flooding issues and the future of climate change, then these are going to be systems that have fairly minimal human modification. And in these instances, no action is perhaps essentially the most appropriate action. Sometimes you can just leave things alone and they will be fine. There aren't many areas of the coast around the US that are like that. The one that I've picked out here might be the Virginia Coastal Reserve, out here on the Atlantic coast of the Delmarva Peninsula, a system which is essentially naturally transgressing from the coast onto the upland. There aren't many places like that, but don't mess these places up. You know, just let them be. They'll be fine. In the middle there, we had that production estuary, and this, for many of us, is the place where we actually derive some benefit from the naturalness of the environment in terms of a production. This term is now common in the ecosystem goods and services literature. And so coastal Louisiana might be somewhere like that, where we have a very important commercial fishery landing, habitat for lots of neotropical migrant birds and waterfowl and those kinds of things. You see the statistics here. But it's a different kind of estuary. It's something that we really gain a very clear product from. And then, so important, and I think the last typology, the one about the urban industrial coast, I think we can all imagine that what that would be on the example. It's New York Harbor or Tokyo Bay, I think. So there is this interplay then between the things that we derive from coast, and this would be the production estuary example, where we've got recreation, we've got commercial fishing, we've got recreational fishing, a really key link to the natural coastal ecosystem there, and I think we can all relate to that. The question is, what about these urban industrial systems? What about these ones where we really need to have ports and harbors, where we really need to have cities and towns where the workers for those water-dependent industries live, so that they can be close to where they work? And for some particular, this obviously is a Gulf Coast example with the offshore oil and gas production, but with energy production in the nearshore, renewables, wind, waves coming more common, the idea that energy production in the nearshore is something, and the workers that live there and need to support that, and the facilities that support that, is again a new coastal industry, a water-dependent industry that we will need to accommodate in terms of this relationship to the natural environment. So we have port facilities that provide intermodal transport, we need workers there, we have pipeline corridors, and we have ways in which we have to allow people to evacuate from these systems. How do we make all this work while retaining some element of the natural system so that we can still provide those production system values and those conservation system values? So how do we move towards a better future within this context? One of the important elements of this particularly from the more natural parts of the system there, the greens and the yellows if you like, is to really focus on the natural dynamics of the system and make sure that we allow those natural dynamics to still function in some way. And so Larry showed an example of a new inlet breach on an island in New Jersey associated with a storm impact. There are ways in which we can understand the places on barrier islands where breaches may occur and what kinds of numbers of breaches would be necessary in order to provide that natural dynamic to occur during storms. We need to provide for sustainable harvest from the production estuaries and make sure that we don't lose very important things that we have. We have to, as Larry said very clearly, focus on managing for transgression. This isn't just sitting there and letting it happen. It's really anticipating and thinking about what that new future is going to be like and provide for that as we move forward. But it's not just about moving. It's not just about taking things out of that coastal zone, because again, we have these very, very important coastal dependent industries that really need to be there. So the secret here, and perhaps there aren't very many examples of places where we can do this, but I'm going to try and give you one just now, is to try to see how we can leverage some of the things that those other uses require in order for us to get better outcomes for the natural components of the ecosystem. And I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on coastal Louisiana in this context. Now, we've heard about Katrina several times already. I'm sure you all can remember that. New Orleans, of course, just up here. Katrina storm track came just about up here. But the other thing, of course, that is happening in coastal Louisiana from the natural system is that we are losing massive amounts of natural wetland to not golf courses and Walmarts, but to open water on an annual basis of the order of 16.5 square miles a year in the last 10 to 15 years or so. So large areas of the coastal wetland are turning to open water. Why is that happening? Well, to some extent, it's happening because of the number of things that we have done in coastal Louisiana: flood management, navigation channels, oil and gas exploration, hurricanes, nutria, all kinds of things coming together to cause this kind of problem. I'm not going to necessarily focus on the problem. The key thing is, what do we do about it? How do we push this forward? And the secret here is really about managing the Mississippi River. And so this is an example of leveraging uses. If you think about the lower Mississippi River, this is a late 19th century diagram of the mouth of the Mississippi River, that bird's foot delta there that we all learned about in high school, or at least I did, even in England learned about it in high school. So here it is in 19th century, and we start to manage it because we think it's a really important asset and there's some really important things that we need to do there. We need to navigate in and out of the mouth of the river in order to be able to support commerce for the rest of the country. This isn't just an optional thing, it's something that's really important to the development of the country. In the 20th century, clearly we engage in a new way of managing the Mississippi River, to some extent in response to the 1927 flood and other forces that are going on in the country. And we start to do other things to it, again, to support really important purposes for the country at that time. The challenge at the bottom of the river down there, where I am, is that what we have is a great set of levees that protect New Orleans and other places from flooding, and they did very well during the 2011 flood. We have great ports, we have wonderful commerce, we support export of soybeans, import of coffee and steel and all kinds of other commerce on the river. We do that, but we do that at some cost. We do that at the cost of the natural environment there. What we really need to do for the 21st century here is to have a much more integrated approach and put all of these different things together. We can't be thinking about the natural environment versus the commercial environment. We have to be thinking about them together in one coastal context with a much more integrated approach to thinking about it. So doing this is going to be difficult, but I think that there are cases where we can identify sweet spots. And I'm going to characterize this sweet spot as a place where what's going on now doesn't work for anybody. And that, I think, is what we have in coastal Louisiana. Clearly, we have a status quo that isn't really working for very many people. The wetlands are degrading. Obviously, we had massive storm flooding, perhaps exacerbated by loss of wetlands during Katrina, big storms coming in. And we have goods that are coming down the river that we can't get to market because we can't keep that river open. So we have this wonderful, valuable system that we've developed over centuries that really isn't working at the moment. So this kind of thing is an opportunity to do something different. This is an opportunity to think in a more integrated context, to think about coastal sustainability from the natural environment, but also think about how we can use that river to get maybe a deeper navigation channel or a more reliable route to the Gulf of Mexico. More reliable protection from storms. How can those wetlands really help attenuate storm surges and waves? And how can we move the flood resources of the Mississippi River when they come down away from our communities? How can we put all of these different things that we would want together into one package that will also provide some benefit to the natural environment? This is the kind of opportunity that we need to seek out and make sure that the natural environment is a key part of those conversations moving forward. So I live down on the coast, and I just wanted to just kind of reflect on you know, we as technicians and experts, we have these conversations. But what do people really need to know when they're down there on the coast? And you work with managers. You know, I'm a kind of pointy-headed academic type. You know, you are much more down there on the ground. What do people really want to know? They really need to know what not to do, and they need to know how to think about the future and how to plan. And they need to think about how to be proactive about what they want their coastal system to be like, not to just react. And this is an example from, this is coastal Louisiana. Obviously, I didn't point this out earlier. I live about here, down here in coastal Louisiana. And there was a hurricane in the end of the 19th century, 1880, something like that. And essentially, this community just moved from Chineri Caminada here down to suburban New Orleans. They did that, but they didn't plan it. They just reacted. They built a new town of West Wego and lost a lot of that culture and heritage when they did that. And so we have to be thinking much more proactively with these coastal communities so that they can design a future that they want, and we can continue to support some of these important coastal industries. So this is my last slide, I think. One of the important things about coasts as we think about them in the next day and a half is there is no one size fits all. If we want to come out with a common message, let's be informed by Sandy, but not constrained by Sandy. There are other kinds of opportunities and systems out there that we need to think about. Change is inevitable. We all know that. It's not just change in the flood environment. It's not just change in sea level. It's also going to be change in commerce and those different kinds of activities. Think about new things like nearshore energy development that are going to be happening on the coast. And really think about how we can put all those together to leverage those multiple uses. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I look forward to trying to make sure that we insert the natural systems into the conversation. Thanks, Doug.